The auction platform was rough wood, splintering under bare feet, and Celeste Ashford forced herself not to think about how many desperate souls had stood here before her, sold like cattle to the highest bidder. The crowd in the dusty square was a mix of merchants, slavers, and opportunists, all hunting for cheap labor, or worse. Lot 73, the auctioneer called in a firm, bored voice. Female, Omega, 22 years old, healthy, no visible defects. Starting bid, 10 silver? Celeste kept her gaze on the ground, her white blonde hair falling forward to hide her face. This moment was the result of 2 years of mounting debts her Uncle Garrett had racked up. Debts he clearly had no intention of paying himself. When the collectors finally arrived, he had offered Celeste instead, his orphaned niece, living under his roof since her parents died when she was 5. 5 silver, someone shouted from the crowd. 3 silver, another voice countered, clearly seeing her as not worth even that much. The bids sank lower and lower, and with each drop, Celeste felt her value diminish. She had known her uncle didn't care for her, but hearing it counted out in falling silver coins brought a new, sharp humiliation. 1 silver coin, a gruff voice finally offered, and the crowd laughed. 1 silver coin, the price of a loaf of bread or a pint of cheap ale. That's what her life is worth. Sold, the auctioneer declared before anyone could bid lower, awarding her to the gentleman in the gray cloak for a single silver coin. Rough hands seized Celeste's arms, dragging her off the platform toward a group of men who embodied every nightmare she'd ever imagined about slavers. The man who had bought her, a scarred brute with cruel eyes, grinned, holding the coin between his fingers before flipping it to the auctioneer. "Worth every penny, I'm sure," he said, his laugh making Celeste's skin crawl. "She'll fetch a better price in the eastern markets once we've broken her in properly." Celeste's blood ran cold. The eastern markets were infamous for trafficking omegas, and breaking them in meant exactly what she feared. She had been sold for a coin to men who would abuse her before passing her along to someone even worse. She struggled, tried to pull away, but the hands holding her were too strong. The crowd was already dispersing, moving on to the next lot, utterly indifferent to her fate. Her Uncle Garrett was nowhere to be seen. He had probably already taken his payment and gone to drink away what little conscience he had left. "Please," Celeste whispered, hating the weakness in her own voice but too terrified to care. "Please, there's been a mistake. I'm not supposed to—" "Shut up!" one of the slavers growled, backhanding her hard enough that she tasted blood. "You're worth 1 silver coin, girl. That means you're worth nothing. Better learn your place quick." They were dragging her toward a wagon when a sound reached them. It began as a distant rumble, like thunder, but quickly grew louder, sharper, more deliberate. Not thunder. Footsteps. Many footsteps moving in perfect synchronization, accompanied by the clink of armor and weapons. The entire market square fell silent as an army appeared at the edge of town. Not just any army, wolves in human and animal form, moving with the precision and discipline of an elite military force. There had to be at least 200 of them, all clad in matching armor bearing a crest that made several in the crowd gasp. "That's the royal crest," someone whispered. "Those are the Alpha King's personal guard." The army spread into perfect formation, surrounding the market square in under a minute. No one would enter or leave without their permission. At the center, mounted on a massive black horse, was a figure radiating such power that every wolf present, including Celeste, felt their knees weaken in submission. The Alpha King himself had come to this border town. He dismounted with fluid grace, and though Celeste couldn't see his face clearly, she felt the weight of his gaze sweep across the square. When his eyes landed on her, captive between 2 slavers, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Release her!" The command rang out across the square with absolute authority. It was not a request. The slavers, frozen in shock since the army arrived, now exchanged confused looks. "Your Majesty," stammered the man who had bought Celeste, "there must be some mistake. We purchased this Omega legally. We have rights." "You have nothing," the Alpha King said, moving toward them. With each step, his alpha power pressed down harder, forcing wolves to their knees, unable to withstand it. "That woman was promised to me 22 years ago, bound by a contract between her father and my father. Every second you've held her against her will is an act of treason against the crown." The words hit Celeste like a physical blow. Promised to the Alpha King 22 years ago. That was impossible. She would have known, would have been told. But even as the thought formed, pieces began to click into place. Her parents had died when she was 5, in what her uncle had called a tragic accident. Uncle Garrett had taken her in, raised her in isolation, never letting her attend pack gatherings or meet other wolves of rank. He had kept her hidden, telling her it was for her own protection. What if it hadn't been protection at all? What if he had been hiding her from someone with a legal claim to her? There must be some mistake. The slaver tried again, his voice now trembling. "We bought her from her legal guardian, paid the auction price. 1 silver coin." The Alpha King's voice cut through the air, cold enough to freeze blood. He had reached them, and up close, Celeste could finally see his face. Younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with features that might have been handsome if not for the fury twisting them. "You valued my intended mate, the future queen of the Northern Territories, at 1 silver coin." He turned to the crowd, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. "Does anyone here want to explain how the woman who should have been under royal protection for the last 17 years ended up on an auction block, sold for the price of a loaf of bread?" Silence followed. Then, from the back of the crowd, a weak voice called out, "Her uncle, Your Majesty, Garrett Ashford. He's been her guardian since her parents died. He's the one who sold her to cover his debts. Find him." The order was directed at his soldiers, who immediately spread through the town. "Bring him to me alive. I want answers before I decide how he dies." The casual way he spoke of execution made Celeste shiver, but she couldn't deny a dark satisfaction at the thought of her uncle facing justice. If the Alpha King spoke truth, Garrett hadn't just sold her to slavers, he had stolen her from her rightful place and hidden her for nearly 2 decades. "Release her," the Alpha King repeated, now addressing the slavers still holding Celeste's arms. They let go so suddenly she nearly fell. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. The Alpha King himself had stepped forward to steady her. The instant his skin touched hers, a shocking electric current passed between them. "It's the mate bond," she realized, astonished, recognizing the sensation from stories she had heard. This wasn't merely a political arrangement or a family contract. They were actual mates, destined by the moon goddess herself. From the way his eyes widened, the Alpha King felt it too. "Impossible," he breathed, staring at her as if witnessing something miraculous. "All these years, I thought the bond was just political. But you're actually your mate," Celeste finished, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I didn't know. I swear I never knew about any contract or promise. My uncle never told me because he was stealing you." The fury returned to the Alpha King's voice, though it softened slightly when his gaze settled on her. "Your father and mine made the arrangement when you were born. You were promised to me, to be raised knowing your future role, educated and protected as a future queen should be. But when your parents died, your uncle saw an opportunity. He took you and hid you away, probably hoping that if enough time passed, the contract would be forgotten, or that he could sell you before anyone came looking." "He almost succeeded," Celeste said as understanding settled heavily in her chest. "If you hadn't arrived when you did." "But I did arrive." His hands were still steadying her, firm and warm, and Celeste found herself unable to break away from his intense gaze. "I've been searching for you for 3 years," he said quietly. "Ever since I took the throne and discovered my intended mate had vanished. Every lead was a dead end. Every trail went cold. Until yesterday, when one of my scouts reported seeing a woman matching your description brought to this auction. 3 years. He had been searching for her for 3 years, and she hadn't even known she was missing from anywhere at all. The weight of what her uncle had stolen from her freedom, her identity, her rightful place, her entire future, was almost too much to grasp. "Your Majesty," a soldier called as he approached, dragging a struggling man. "We found Garrett Ashford trying to leave town through the eastern gate." Celeste's uncle looked smaller than she remembered, all his usual bravado gone under the crushing force of royal authority. When he saw the Alpha King, what little color was left in his face drained completely. "Your Majesty," Garrett stammered, dropping to his knees. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I can explain." "Explain." The Alpha King's voice was deadly quiet. "Explain how you stole a child under royal protection. Explain how you kept her hidden for 17 years, denying her an education meant to prepare her for her future role. Explain how you sold my mate, for 1 silver coin to slavers who intended to abuse and traffic her." "I didn't know." Garrett's lie was obvious to everyone present. "I thought the contract was void when her parents died. I was just trying to provide for her, and when the debts became too much." "You sold her to save yourself?" The Alpha King cut in coldly. "You took advantage of a 5-year-old child's grief and stole her future. And when your own debts caught up with you, you tried to dispose of her like garbage." He turned to his commander, a stern-faced woman who had been watching everything with cold fury. "Commander Aldrich, what is the penalty for kidnapping a member of the royal family?" "Death, Your Majesty." "And for interfering with a royal contract?" "Death, Your Majesty." "And for human trafficking?" "Death, Your Majesty." The Alpha King nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Garrett's terrified face. 3 capital offenses. That's impressive, even for a waste of life like you. But I think death would be too quick, too merciful for what you've done." He paused, letting the silence stretch, his voice carrying across the square when he finally spoke again. "Garrett Ashford, you are hereby sentenced to spend the remainder of your life in the royal dungeons, performing hard labor to pay off your debts. Every day you will work, and every day you will remember that you had something precious in your care. A child who trusted you, a future queen who should have been protected. And you threw it all away for gambling and drink. Take him away." As the guards dragged a sobbing Garrett out of the square, the Alpha King turned his attention to the slavers who had purchased Celeste. His expression made it clear he had something special planned for them too. "You purchased stolen property," he said softly. The gentleness in his tone was somehow more terrifying than anger. "You intended to abuse and traffic a woman who belongs to the royal family. What do you think should happen to you?" "We didn't know," one of them pleaded. "We had no idea she was—" 1 silver coin, the Alpha King snapped sharply. He stepped closer, eyes hard. "You looked at a young woman, evaluated her worth, and decided she was worth less than a loaf of bread. Even if she hadn't been my intended mate, even if she were just a random Omega with no one to protect her. That level of contempt for another living being tells me exactly what kind of men you are." He turned to Commander Aldrich again. "Strip them of all assets. Every coin, every possession, everything they own goes to the crown. Then brand them as slavers and release them into the territories. Let's see how they enjoy being on the other side of the transaction, when they have nothing and no one will employ them." The punishment was harsh but not fatal, and Celeste found herself unexpectedly surprised by the mercy. When she looked at the Alpha King, confused, he seemed to understand without her speaking. Death would be quick, he said quietly. Living with the consequences of their actions, facing the same vulnerability and desperation they inflicted on others, will be a far longer punishment. And if they're ever found trafficking again, then they die. But everyone deserves one chance to become better than they were. The pragmatic mercy in his voice made Celeste see him differently. This wasn't just a powerful alpha throwing his weight around. This was a ruler who weighed justice and consequences with clear, deliberate thought. As the criminals were escorted away and the crowd began to thin, the Alpha King finally turned his full attention to Celeste. Up close, she could see the concern beneath his commanding exterior. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. "Did they harm you?" "I'm fine," Celeste replied, though her cheek still throbbed from where the slaver had struck her. "Or, I will be. This has all been rather overwhelming." "I can imagine." He hesitated, then continued softly. "I know you were just rescued from being sold as property, and the last thing you probably want is to be told you belong to someone else, even if the circumstances are different. But Celeste, I need you to understand something." She waited, heart steady but curious. "The contract between our fathers was meant to protect you," he said, "to ensure you were raised with every advantage, prepared for an important role. It was never meant to trap you or weigh you down. And now that I know we're true mates, not just political partners, everything changes." "How?" Celeste asked, genuinely wanting to know. "Because mate bonds can't be forced," he explained. "The moon goddess may pair souls that belong together, but she does not take away free will. Which means I'm offering you a choice, Celeste." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Come with me to the royal territory. Let me show you the life you were meant to have, and could still have. Take time to heal. Learn your heritage, your place, your purpose. And when you're ready, decide if you want to accept the mate bond and become my queen." Celeste swallowed. "And if I say no?" She had to ask, though some quiet part of her already knew she wouldn't. "Then I'll ensure your safety, help you build whatever life you choose, and step back." His eyes softened. "Your happiness matters more to me than any contract or political agreement." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Though I'll admit, I'll be hoping you say yes. Finding your true mate is supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime blessing, and I'd be a fool not to try to win your heart." It was his honesty, his respect for her freedom despite all the power he held, that made Celeste's choice easier than it had any right to be. "I'll come with you," she said. "Not because of the contract or because you saved me, but because I want to know who I was meant to be, who I could still become, and because the mate bond is pulling at me in ways I don't fully understand yet." Relief and joy flashed across his face, so raw it almost hurt to look at. "Thank you," he breathed. "You have no idea what this means to me." "Actually," Celeste replied softly, "I think I might." Because she felt it too, the way her wolf recognized his, the way something deep inside her had settled the moment he touched her. A sense of rightness that had nothing to do with contracts or duty, and everything to do with two souls finally finding each other. The journey to the royal territory took 3 days. During that time, the Alpha King, who insisted she call him Theron in private, told her everything she had missed. Her parents had been minor nobility, close friends with the former Alpha King. When Celeste was born and Theron was 10, the two fathers recognized the potential for a strong alliance and arranged a betrothal contract. Not uncommon among noble families, though usually everyone involved was informed and prepared. "You were supposed to come live in the palace when you were 12, Theron explained as they rode side by side through the forest. "Old enough to begin serious education, but young enough to adapt to court life. Your parents were excited about it. According to letters in the archives, they wanted you to have every opportunity. every advantage. But then they died, Celeste said quietly. Yes, Theron replied, his expression darkening, in what we now know was no accident. I've had investigators look into it, he continued. The evidence suggests your uncle arranged their deaths specifically so he could claim guardianship and keep you hidden. The words should have shocked Celeste, but they didn't. She had always sensed, deep down, that something about her parents' deaths didn't add up. Her uncle's story had too many holes, too many convenient details. Why would he do that? She asked. What did he gain by keeping me hidden? Control, power, the satisfaction of thumbing his nose at royal authority, Theron said, shrugging. Men like Garrett don't always have rational motives. Sometimes they just want to feel like they've gotten away with something. Over the 3 days of travel, Celeste learned more about the world she had been kept from. About pack politics, territorial boundaries, the role of the Alpha King, and the responsibilities that came with it. Theron was patient with her questions, never making her feel foolish for not knowing things she should have learned years ago. But more than the education, she learned about him. Not the Alpha King, but Theron, the man. He told her about taking the throne at 29 after his father's death, about the weight of responsibility and the loneliness of leadership. He shared his hopes for creating a more just society, his frustration with nobles who cared more about status than service. And slowly, carefully, he told her about searching for her. How he had taken the throne and immediately looked into the betrothal contract, only to discover that his intended mate had vanished years ago. How he had spent resources and time tracking down every lead, desperate to find her, not just because of the contract, but because something inside him insisted she was important. I think my wolf knew, he admitted on the second night as they sat by the campfire, the soldiers keeping a respectful distance. Even before we discovered the mate bond, I think some part of me recognized that you were meant to be mine. I wish I had known, Celeste said softly. All those years living with my uncle, being told I was worthless and unwanted. I wish I had known there was someone out there looking for me, that I had value to someone. You have value to me, Theron said fiercely, not because of the contract or the mate bond, though those matter, but because you're brave and intelligent and kind. Despite everything you've been through, you have worth, Celeste, regardless of whether anyone recognizes it. The palace, when they finally reached it, was beyond anything Celeste could have imagined. Massive and beautiful, built of white stone that seemed to glow in the sunlight. Staff members lined up to greet their returning king, and Celeste was overwhelmed by the sheer number of wolves present. But what struck her most was how they looked at her. Not with suspicion or judgment, but with curiosity, and something that looked like relief. These people had been waiting for her, she realized. For 17 years, they had known their king had an intended mate who was missing. Her arrival meant something significant to them. "Welcome home, my lady," an elderly woman said with a deep curtsy. "We've been preparing for your arrival for many years. It's a joy to finally have you here." The rooms Theron gave her were larger than any space Celeste had ever lived in. A massive bed covered in soft blankets, a bathroom with actual hot running water, and windows overlooking mountains that stretched endlessly into the distance. It was overwhelming, and wonderful, and terrifying all at once. "Take your time settling in," Theron said gently. "You don't have to make any decisions or take on responsibilities right away. Just rest, recover, and let yourself adjust to being safe." But that night, alone in her beautiful rooms, Celeste found she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the auction, the feeling of being valued at 1 silver coin, the terror of being sold to slavers, and then the miracle of Theron's arrival. The army of 200 wolves sent to reclaim what had been stolen from him. She had gone from being worth nothing to being worth everything in the span of hours, and she didn't know how to process it. A soft knock on her door pulled her out of her spiraling thoughts. When she opened it, Theron stood there, concern etched across his face. "I could feel your distress through the mate bond," he explained. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I don't know if I'm okay," Celeste admitted. "This morning I was being sold for a coin. Tonight, I'm in a palace being told I'm a future queen. It doesn't feel real." "Come with me," Theron said, offering his hand. "I want to show you something." He led her through the palace corridors to a wing she hadn't seen yet. At the end of a long hallway was a door that opened into what looked like a private archive. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books and papers, and in the center stood a large table covered in neatly arranged documents. "This is everything about you," Theron said, stepping aside so she could take it in. "Every letter your parents wrote about you, every preparation that was made for your arrival, every search party I sent out looking for you. I wanted you to see all of it, so you would understand that you were never worthless. You were wanted, valued, and searched for. What your uncle told you, what those slavers made you feel, it was all lies." Celeste approached the table with trembling hands. Letters from her mother to the former queen, filled with excitement about her daughter's future. Plans for her education, training, and integration into palace life. Financial records showing resources set aside specifically for her. And then, more recently, pages upon pages of search reports, each one ending in disappointment, but none of them stopping. 17 years of searching. 17 years of someone caring that she was gone. "You did all this for me," she whispered, tears running freely down her face. "Even before you knew about the mate bond. You looked for me." "Because you mattered," Theron said simply. "Because a contract had been made, and I honor commitments. Because somewhere out there was a young woman who should have been protected and wasn't, and that was unacceptable to me." Celeste turned toward him, and suddenly all the fear, disbelief, and uncertainty melted into clarity. "I accept." Theron's breath caught. "Accept what?" he asked, though hope blazed in his eyes. "The mate bond, the role of queen, everything." She stepped closer, feeling the bond between them tighten like a drawn bowstring. "I know it's fast, and maybe I should take more time, but Theron, you spent 3 years searching for someone you'd never met. You brought an army to save me from slavers. You showed me proof that I was wanted and valued long before you knew we were mates. How could I possibly walk away from that?" "Celeste," he breathed. And then she was in his arms, and he was kissing her like she was air and he'd been drowning without her. The mate bond flared bright and fierce, solidifying into something permanent and unbreakable. In that moment, Celeste understood what it meant to belong, what it meant to be home. When they finally parted, both breathless and radiant with joy, Theron pressed his forehead to hers. "I promise you," he murmured, voice rough with emotion, "I will spend every day for the rest of our lives proving that you are worth more than every treasure in my kingdom combined." "I believe you," Celeste whispered, and she did. The official mating ceremony was held 2 weeks later, after Celeste had time to adjust to palace life and meet with the royal tutors. Wolves from every corner of the territory arrived to witness their alpha king bind himself to the woman who had once been sold for a single silver coin. The symbolism was powerful, no one missed it. During the ceremony, Theron did something no one expected. He revealed a small box, and inside was a pendant crafted from a melted silver coin. Her coin. "This coin represents the lowest moment of your life," he said, as he fastened the chain gently around her neck. "A moment when someone decided your worth could be measured in metal. But I'm giving it back to you changed, transformed, because you changed everything the moment you stepped into my life. Wear it to remember that even the worst pieces of your past can be forged into something beautiful. Celeste touched the pendant, feeling its cool weight settle over her heart. She thought of the path that had brought her here, from the orphaned girl hidden away by a greedy uncle, to the terrified woman sold for a coin, to the queen now standing proudly beside her mate before an entire kingdom. She had been told she was nothing, yet the Alpha King had sent 200 wolves to bring her home. She had been sold for almost nothing, but it turned out she meant everything to the one who mattered. When they sealed the ceremony with a kiss, magic flared around them. Soft, shimmering lights drifting through the air like sparks from the moon itself. And Celeste knew with absolute certainty that she had arrived exactly where she belonged. The woman sold for a coin had become the most treasured soul in the kingdom. Not because of a contract, not because of politics, but because her mate, her king, had looked at her and seen not what she lacked, but everything she was and everything she could become. Sometimes the lowest point of your life is simply the universe clearing space for something extraordinary. Sometimes being sold for nothing is the first step to discovering you're priceless. And sometimes, when you're most vulnerable and alone, an Alpha King arrives with an army to remind the world that you were never worthless at all. You were simply waiting for the right person to see your true value.